from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. Highlights from the latest Cattle Chat podcast from the Beef Cattle Institute here at K-State. Brad White, Bob Larson, Bob Weaber, and Dustin Pendell will tackle a couple of topics: consolidation trends in livestock production and important considerations when putting up atypical forage for cattle feeding. Then K-State's Jonathan Aguilar will talk about several of the innovative irrigation technologies that are being tested out at numerous farms in Kansas, collaborating with K-State. Those technologies and their performance will be featured at 10 Water Technology Field Days coming up this month. And later, with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven. Plus more on this, Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. First up on this Wednesday edition, the Alliance of K-State researchers who make up the Beef Cattle Institute here at the university have put out their latest podcast, where each week they talk over topical matters in beef cattle production and management. Around the table this week, the full quartet: K-State veterinarians Brad White and Bob Larson, cow-calf production specialist Bob Weaber, and livestock economist Dustin Pendell. Brad, as always, the moderator.
Dustin, we talk about consolidation in the ag industry, and I think you've got some numbers you looked up.
Yes, absolutely, Brad. What I want to do is I went out to the USDA's Economic Research Service, their website. They did a report late spring titled 3 Decades of Consolidation in U.S. Agriculture. And specifically, I'm just going to pull out a little bit of information for this week, but then I want to follow up next week also some additional information. This week, I want to focus on livestock, talking about livestock production, specializing in livestock. Looking at all livestock across the different sectors, if you will: cattle, dairy, hogs, and poultry. So those 4 different species. All livestock increased in specialization between 1996 and 2015. It went from 37% in terms of measured value of production on farms that had no crop production. Compare that to 1996, where 22% of those same farms did not produce any crop. So we saw some specialization across all livestock farms. So now what I want to do is I want to actually break it out and look at those 4 species specifically, or I want to ask some questions. So of those 4 species, cattle, dairy, hogs, and poultry, between 1996 and 2015, which of those 4 did we see the largest increase in specialization? So farms that only produced livestock.
Right. I'm going to say not poultry, because they were already more consolidated prior to that time, so they didn't make as much change. I'd say maybe the dairy guys.
Okay, so we got dairy, poultry.
I'm still saying poultry.
I'm going to say swine guys, because
we got 3 different answers.
In that point in time, there were still some farrow to finish farm guys, I think.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm not.
That was about the time things really started
to shift.
Bob here is correct on hogs probably being the largest, and then your comment, the other Bob, about poultry already happened. It's being the smallest. I think you're correct as well. So both of you guys can get some points.
All right, there we go.
And again,
Weber and Larson +1.
This week, Brad is
still 0. I'm going to get a point.
0.
You got another question.
We should have a running total and put it up on the website.
And so hogs probably had the largest. Cattle beef cattle really close second, followed by poultry and dairy a little ways back. And then I think the most important thing is why did this consolidation change? Why is this happening? Any speculation, any thoughts?
Well, one of the things that I think happened on the swine side was, I guess, I'd be interested to see what real experts, because here we are, a bunch of beef guys talking about swine. But, some of the technology, some of the housing, along with some of the disease control, led to more, really all in, all out. So no more buying feeder pigs at a feeder pig sale, but really farrow to finish, either in one operation or in a coordinated system. And so I saw some housing changes, saw some health expectation changes, and that's what I saw kind of driving it as an outsider. What else?
I think part of it was, wasn't there a pretty substantial geographic shift in where swine production happened, right? So there's still a lot of pigs in Iowa, but now there's pigs in like New Mexico and Colorado, and I mean some of these larger confinement, North Carolina, and places that didn't used to have big numbers of pigs, and so those operations
kind of came.
It's easy to haul in pig feed, right?
Right.
I mean, it's harder to haul cattle feed, more expensive.
Yeah. So you tell me.
I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer. It was more just, why do we see this happening? I would argue, yes, technologies. We saw confinements. We saw possibly technologies that saved on labor costs would be another possibility. They mentioned in this article possibly agriculture policy. Some policies might have helped maybe where individual or where farms are being located. So kind of come back to your specialization by geographic region.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about sort of the business climate thing, though. We think about maybe a contract swine operation. Do I actually corporately separate that from my other farming activities as a sort of risk protection from a business standpoint? So there's now an LLC that runs the swine contract feed and grow operation that's a separate entity from our regular family farming operations, for instance. And so maybe as part of, I don't know, Dustin, does that make sense? Is there maybe some structural change in the business structures of those entities?
Yeah, there could be. But actually, we'll talk about some of that on the farm, thinking about the family farm versus maybe your corporate farm next week when we follow up with consolidation on the farms and the farm sizes and the number of farms next week.
Excellent.
Cool.
Certain areas of the country are in very dry conditions, others less so, others have some rain. People are still planning for what is it going to look like this fall, and because we don't know, we've seen a lot of things bailed, and Bob, you and I were talking about it. People are bailing a lot of stuff they don't normally bail. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yes, and I think anytime that different parts of the country, probably every year, some part of the country is having a drought. Many years, some part of Kansas is having a drought. And so even though that doesn't affect any of us every year, it affects pretty much everyone in the cattle industry sooner or later. And one of the things that I see is using feedstuffs that you're not used to. The good thing is cattle are able to be, they're highly adaptable. They can eat a wide variety of feedstuffs. So it's really the people. Are the people trained to utilize the different feedstuffs? And if you're not used to a certain feedstuff, then make sure you get extra information. And so some of the things that I've seen here in Kansas is bailing up what it would be typically a weed, kochia weed, which can be a decent feedstuff, but it's got some real problems. It can be high in nitrates, it can be high in oxalates, it can be other problems. So if you're using a feed that you're not used to, be sure to get more information. So veterinarians, extension agents, the NRCS folks, people that can provide some additional information about a feedstuff that you're not used to, I think is really important before you start feeding it, because a lot of times we'll dilute them. We might do some nitrate testing, some different things to make sure that these feedstuffs are safe and ready to use.
And nitrates is one of the things that we talked a little about. And Bob, you mentioned the corn. Some of the people doing with the corn.
Yeah, there's a lot of corn chopping going on.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, how do we handle that? The ways that you mentioned, testing, dilution. A lot of times, but we need to understand: is it an issue or not in this particular case? Because there's no one size fits all answer. And you really have to be able to test and evaluate what's going on. What about some of the other things, like some of the CRP ground has been opened up and available for hay? Concerns, thoughts, how do we handle that? What are some of the best practices?
Yeah, so I think there's some real opportunity there, and particularly here in Northeast Kansas. I mean, the local hay markets have gotten fairly expensive just because of demand. Some rain recently, so maybe some later season CRP hay will be real valuable. One of the challenges is a lot of times, obviously, that ground hasn't been hayed for quite some time, and so you get a lot of standing dormant stuff that may be 2-3 years old. So sometimes nutrient quality is not particularly good. We can manage that if we know. So hay testing is a real important strategy, and particularly protein supplementation to go with that. So just think traditional late season dormant low quality forage. You got to put some protein with it, maybe some ionophore to kind of help stimulate passage rate and rumen performance. The other piece, though, that sticks out to me is a lot of times some CRP ground has lots of other undesirable stuff growing in it, right? So thinking about, well, if it's got some cedar trees rolled up in it and some lespedeza and some stuff like that, buying some CRP hay that's got a bunch of cerisa in it and then rolling it out on tall grass prairies, probably not the best idea. So having some plans about where you're going to feed that and how you're going to handle the manure stream off of that feeding site is something that oftentimes we don't think about until the next year, and we got this new crop of weeds out there.
I've heard about some of these situations. I mean, because my first thought is, well, let's think about the nutrient quality of the hay, the CRP hay, whatever, and balance it so that the cows thrive. But I've seen and heard about some different situations where you roll this hay out. I bought it from someplace else, roll it out on this pasture, and now I've got weeds that I've never had before.
Yep.
I've got problems that I didn't have before. And so now you got to start really thinking about that. And this is really seeds that are passing through the manure. Is that correct? So the cattle are consuming it, comes through the manure, and now you've got weed seeds put into a pasture that didn't used to have that pasture.
Could be both. I mean, it could come through the manure, but it's also where you spread it out, where you feed it.
Unroll the hay. Yep. So I think either one, in particularly, this time of year, most of our springborn calves are old enough that we should consider early weaning to decrease nutrient demand anyway. Mm-hmm. So actually dry lotting dry cows and limit feeding them can be a very effective and typically even on a non-drought year, can be a very cost-effective way to run cows. And so in some cases, that dry lot strategy and then taking that manure stream and applying it to crop ground where we know is going to get some herbicide treatment anyway may make some good sense. So,
good way to think it all the way through.
You got to think it all the way through. So, yeah.
We appreciate you joining us today. As always, if you want to send us a comment, thought, or question, you can email us at bci@ksu.edu. So we're happy to have you join us this week, and we'll talk to you next week.
K-State's Brad White, Bob Larson, Dustin Pendell, and Bob Weaber. You can listen to the full podcast and find out how to subscribe to it at www.beefcattleinstitute.org, beefcattleinstitute.org. This is Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on this Agriculture Today. K-State Research and Extension has made a concerted effort in recent years to provide to crop irrigators in particular the latest on technological advancements for irrigation improvement, and this has been manifested in water technology farms, which will be featured at a series of field days throughout the month of August. And we'll get into all of that right now with one of those who coordinates these efforts in large part. Jonathan Aguilar is on the phone with us, Research and Extension Water Resource Engineer for K-State, based in southwest Kansas. Jonathan, the water tech farms, let's go over the concept itself that has taken shape over the past few years, and you've been deeply involved in this. What really inspired all of this?
Yeah, a good day there, Eric. The concept itself, it started with the water vision coordination with the producers about several years ago, and we were trying to figure out what's the best way to be able to do it. It has been a good way to be able to feature the technology on a farmer's field, and it was able to increase at least the adoption of some of the areas of some of the technologies that could be attributable to the conservation of the water, particularly in the Ogallala region. Mm-hmm. And so we've got farmers that have opened up their fields, these technologies, and open it up to other producers out there so that they could see the technology working, or if those are not working itself, they would have a feedback on what they should be expecting in some cases. And so this series of field days this coming August is a way for the producers to be able to go out there and figure out what works and what doesn't work in their operation, and ask the producers themselves who are testing this, what's their experience about those different management and technological advances that they have been trying.
And the uniqueness of this, in part anyway, is because these are being tested out in real farm situations. They're not simulations whatsoever, are they?
That is correct. Real management, real operation of the farmers. It's not a small plot, it's a big plots. In fact, we have operations out there that are comparing one circle or 120 acres against another circle, which is another 120 acres, and trying to see if those technologies are really working on those scales.
Jonathan, for a moment here, talk about how this program has grown in scope. It now features several farm sites throughout western Kansas, and you've added locations in south central Kansas of late as well.
The expansion of the water technology farms, I would probably attribute to the idea that this concept is catching on. The way that we present it, such that it is now a real thing, it's a real farm experiment, not just on a small field, is actually catching on with the producers. They accept that idea better. And I would probably say that also partly it is also on the producers themselves who have opened up their fields. And they do have different ideas. And that's the beauty of this, is that whatever idea the producers have, we try to help them answer those questions and try to figure out, okay, if this is going to work in your field, let's try it actually in your field and see if we were able to answer those questions that you have. And that's the beauty of this one. It is not constrained about what kind of technology we have, but it's actually constrained by the imagination of the producers. And so we've got several producers that have other ideas on approaching water conservation. And the expansion in the central part is not on the water reduction itself, but actually managing also the salinity. And if they are also doing the best job of managing those contaminants and those water quality issues. And with the help of the KSRE, we are trying to help them design and tweak out the answers when they put out this technology or management system in their farms.
And all of this will be on display at no less than 10 field days coming up throughout the month of August, the first of which is next Tuesday, August the 7th in Pawnee County. Jonathan, just a flavor here of what some of the main technologies will be, in fact, discussed at these field days, those that are earning the research attention at these participating farms. Could you share those?
Sure. So some of the technologies that we are dealing the applicators. So what kind of irrigation applicators are the best to manage in their field? So we've got the mobile drip irrigation or the dragon line. We've got the spray or the low elevation spray. We've got the bubblers. We have also the fixed plate and the moving plate. They've got a lot of things that they could deal with about all of those water application devices. And so they just want to know that what they're doing is probably the best, or it's already one of the top efficiency that they could use. The other is on the management of the scheduling. So some of them are using soil moisture sensors to do the scheduling. They know that we still get some rain sometimes in western Kansas. And when you get those rains, those are the opportunities that you could reduce or you could stop your irrigation system. And so having a feedback in the field, like a soil moisture sensors or the plant-based sensors, could give you more confidence to be able to turn off the system. Other than that, we also have the ET scheduling systems. See if we could increase the adoption, and at the same time, we could test if this is also going to work. This type of management or ET scheduling will also work on those different types of applicators. The other thing that the producers are also testing is the planting in circles, the use of the cover crops to be able to manage their water, and also the frequency and the intensity of application of the irrigation devices. So those are some of just the technologies that producers could expect in some of these fields.
And it's a broad spectrum of technologies that will be covered at these. And we've learned quite a bit over the past year in each of these areas. Then you feel, Jonathan, there's new information out there that will be helpful to producers?
Yes, we are all learning at the same time. For example, the bubbler, it's an old technology. And now we are trying to just firm up some of what we had known before that, for example, some of the bubblers would work well in a flat ground. But if you've got some topography, you might have to have a lot of adjustments or that might not actually work. So what we are learning here is not only those that are positive, but also some of the challenges when we are going to adopt these technologies. So not all of them are going to work seamlessly or 100% at a time. So we are trying to figure out, okay, if you have this type of technology, these are the things that you should be mindful of. Maybe we could recommend that this is not something that you should use in some cases. So learning is not only trying to figure out where it would work, but probably also where it would not work.
Irrigators throughout the state, no matter where you are, take in one of these field days coming up here very soon. And do you need pre-registrations for these, or can producers just show up on that given day, Jonathan?
Most of them, we don't need any pre-registration, but if they could give us a heads up, that would always help us in preparing for either a refreshment or some of the materials that we are going to prepare. But in most cases, they could just show up. The closest one or the most convenient day that they could be available or the most pressing issue that they are interested about, you could just show up there and learn more about those things.
And the easiest way for a farmer out there to find out more information on any of these, as we will list them shortly, they can contact you directly. They can go to the Southwest Research and Extension website.
Yes, they could call me at 620-275-9164, or they could visit our Southwest Research and Extension website. We have there a water technology farm webpage that I am trying to update in terms of the schedules and so forth. So they will learn wherever they go.
And we hope folks will contact you and let you know that they are coming to one of these. It ought to be an outstanding series starting August the 7th and running through August the 31st. And again, we'll walk right through the schedule in just a few moments. But Jonathan, it's been a great project to date, and the best of luck with all of these field days coming up. And hopefully producers will glean great information on their irrigation water management and the potential for enhancing that management through new technology. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much also, and we hope to see all of you and all of the producers that are listening.
That's Jonathan Aguilar. He is a water resource engineer, K-State Research and Extension. Again, here is the lineup of the Water Technology Field Days 2018. We'll just list the counties, and then you can look into more information on the exact locations in each county. But August the 7th in Pawnee County, August the 15th in Finney County, then August the 27th at two locations, one in Harvey County, the other in Sedgwick County, August 28th, again, two locations, Finney County and Seward County, August 29th in Sherman County, and August the 30th, Scott County and Wichita County, and August the 31st, finally, in Ford County. Go to southwest.ksu.edu, and as you arrive at that website, search simply for Water Technology Farms. That should direct you to the information you need. We'll be back with more. This is Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
This is Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. And welcome back. Eric Atkinson here. Today's agricultural news headlines in brief for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, the U.S. has either ignored or rejected an apparent request by Canadian Foreign Minister Chrystia Freeland to join the talks taking place tomorrow in Washington between U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Mexican Economy Minister Alfonso Guajardo. That, according to several media reports, indications are that the apparent U.S. stance has come from a view that Canada needs to make some concessions before they will be invited into these discussions. However, Canadian officials have indicated they were not wanting to offer concessions until the talks reached their final stages. This comes as U.S. officials have signaled they may reach a NAFTA deal with Mexico before Canada. There have been no three-way talks between the NAFTA 2.0 parties since May. However, Freeland and Lighthizer have continued to discuss issues via telephone. U.S. and European Union officials continue, meantime, to give different signals on what the two sides will negotiate as a part of the agreement reached last week between President Trump and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. U.S. officials have taken the position that negotiations will be about agriculture, all of agriculture. The EU side insists that the talks will only deal with soybeans. Lighthizer insisted the talks will cover more than beans, quoting here, "We are negotiating about agriculture, period. That's part of the process." Those in Lighthizer's words at a Senate hearing. Meantime, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue said this week and reiterated that agriculture will be a part of those discussions. He says certainly Representative Lighthizer definitely plans to make agriculture a topic in the discussions going forward. Quoting Perdue, "I think the truce that was called for was, let's see how we can have conversations for the benefit of both the U.S. and the EU. For that, and for us, that includes agriculture." Agricultural leaders of the G20 nations vowed this past weekend in Argentina to reform the World Trade Organization. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
When President Trump and EU President Juncker met in Washington, Trump said among the things they agreed to do,
"We will work closely together to reform the WTO."
And this past weekend in Buenos Aires, agriculture ministers from the G20 countries agreed the World Trade Organization rules, particularly those for trading in food and farm products, do need reform. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue was at that meeting. He told reporters,
"Most of the conversation had to do with the enforcement of the things like the OIE and the standards that we have agreed upon based on sound science. Many countries follow those, and some choose to ignore them. And what we were trying to determine is how we can make the WTO more of an organization that truly guides international trade the way it was intended."
In a statement, the G20 ag ministers said they were concerned about increased use of non-tariff protectionist trade barriers, but did not lay out a plan on what to do about them. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The European Court of Justice, that's the European Union's highest court, has ruled that gene-edited products should be treated like genetically modified organisms, which are subject to substantial regulation in the EU. This could affect future crop traits produced with gene-editing techniques here in the U.S. Now, gene-editing techniques such as CRISPR allow scientists to edit a single gene or a small group of genes to create a crop trait that would have taken many years of conventional breeding to produce. Although a gene-edited crop using these techniques has yet to be fully commercialized here in the U.S., agricultural companies, universities, and government institutions are very busy developing plant traits with these techniques. For example, DuPont Pioneer has used the CRISPR to develop corn hybrids with improved resistance to northern corn leaf blight and is nearing commercialization of a CRISPR-produced waxy corn hybrid. USDA scientists are developing soybean plants with improved drought and salt tolerance using the same technique. Crops such as these could face long regulatory delays from the EU before commercialization, as their GM counterparts already do, but only if the court decisions affect future government policy there. That according to the American Seed Trade Association's Bernice Slutsky. One thing to keep in mind, this is a legal interpretation of existing law. As she said, it's not a policy or political decision, and now that the court has made the ruling, the next step is to determine what the European Commission will do with that. The ruling was met with concern and disappointment from U.S. industry and academia and earned a condemnation from the USDA, which has taken an opposite stance on gene-edited crops, the agency announcing back in April that gene-edited crops would not fall under the USDA's regulation unless they were produced with plant pest material. The beef industry is working to gain the trust of Millennial and Generation Z consumers. Todd Domer tells us here that the Kansas Beef Council is working with bloggers to reach those key audiences.
Kansas Beef Council staff recently hosted 9 of the top digital influencers in the Kansas City area for an evening of beef education titled Meat Up. The Chekhov-funded event put influencers through a meat-cutting class, during which they fabricated KC strip steaks from a strip roast. Participants were sent home with steaks, recipe brochures, information on accurate labeling guidelines, and suggestions to make them confident when cooking beef. While digital content is still being produced and distributed from Meat Up, 9 influencers already have shared 92 pieces of content that reached more than 100,000 consumers in the Kansas City area. Many posted pictures and text on Instagram of them preparing the KC strips and talking about the taste attributes of the steaks. 2 of the more popular bloggers posted pictures of themselves preparing the bourbon espresso sauce for the steaks, which could be made using Kansas City ingredients. The goal of the Meat Up event was for the Beef Council to become the go-to resource for all things beef with participants. Research shows consumers place a high degree of trust in digital influencers. The Kansas Beef Council plans to further engage with these influential bloggers who have a direct line of communication with a sizable audience of Millennial and Generation Z consumers. Several expressed interest in touring a Kansas ranch. I'm Todd Domer.
And lastly, this just out this morning, the Division of Conservation at the Kansas Department of Agriculture has announced the availability of funds to assist landowners with their efforts to mitigate the impact of drought. The Livestock Water Supply Financial Assistance Initiative will provide financial assistance for livestock water supply wells, pipeline, and tanks installed after June the 1st and ahead of the announcement of the EQIP Drought Initiative by the NRCS on July the 24th. Additional program details on this can be found at agriculture.ks.gov. You're listening to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
As I dropped my passengers off, I parked the car, and I too went inside the building.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Tuesday, 2 weeks ago, it rained early in the morning. I was thankful for more rain, as the land, the crops, and the grass needed it. But I'd been watching the weather and made plans for a dry day. We wanted to make a trip to show Kansas to Dutch family and friends. The decision had been made for Tuesday, after looking at the weather earlier. A nice day was predicted, but like I said, it had rained. A welcome gift, and it was cooler. That, too, was a gift. So being in no hurry, we started off with an early cup of coffee. Then we decided to take the day as it came. The first stop would be the Eisenhower Museum in Abilene, we would be inside, and Ike, as commander-in-chief, was important to all of us, and later as president, he also had impacted our lives. You might say, we love Ike. As a child, Anneke, my wife, had seen General Eisenhower in Utrecht, the Netherlands. That was the hometown. The plan was to stick to more interesting county roads, but we drove I-70 to Abilene. As we drove, the wipers went whoosh, 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 but then went whoosh, whoosh, and then I could switch them off. At one time, we saw a small patch of blue sky. As I dropped the passengers off, I parked the car, and I too went inside the building. Walking through the display area, I glanced at the books, always fascinating. But I have several books about that era. Don't laugh. I stood longer in front of the display with items such as model airplanes, trucks, etc. The detailed models of the mighty bomber planes, which I had seen as a child draw vapor trails way, way up in the sky on a clear day, on their way to Germany for a bombing run. Standing there, I saw it. I felt it. I could hear the droning. Just looking at the models, I remembered. The other article, which I briefly held in my hand, was a detailed replica of World War II Jeep. Holding it in my hands, I could hear the engine. It has its own sound. They all did, when they ran smoothly. In 1952 in Australia, I drove a restored Army Jeep, picked up out of New Guinea. A friend had it flown in on a surface plane to use at his dairy farm. And use we did. I remember driving it up and down the long, muddy farm road to the road to set the milk cans. At that time, milk was still handled in the cans. 4 or 5 cans in the back of the Jeep, rattling when they were empty, bonking when they were full. I nearly bought the detailed replica. We saw the movie, and I listened to Ike's familiar voice, also later as the President of these United States. More people should listen to what he says. The man loved his country, this country, and he gave it all he had. He was a humble man. The house where he and his brothers grew up is always fascinating. It's a small house. Of course, across the track there was the Seeley house, as many other beautiful houses we looked at later driving through town. The explanation in the house was given with a clear voice and respect. Then we walked to the library. The museum is being restored. In the library there was a small space set aside for artifacts. The items which struck me the most were a rusted rifle and a helmet, both washed up much later on the beach of Normandy. Both items must have been carried in at one time. Then there was the moment of loss. I thought of our medic friend Charles, who went ashore with the first waves and did his job. He was back once more in France just this past June, remembering. I looked at both items for a long time, and I said, "Thank you." Some of us walked to Ike's statue. By now, the rain had stopped and the air was fresh and clean. It's amazing how peaceful the grounds are. It used to be part of the town, across the railroad tracks. The walking under the part shade of the trees provides the needed time to think and contemplate. Today, people and school children should visit and be told who Ike was to their grandparents' history and who he was for our country. While I went to get the car, the others walked into the chapel, a special place. Europe has its cathedrals. Ike has his chapel with wife and small son. All that under the Kansas blue sky. We drove on to Lynchburg, taking Route 4. With clouds and countryside, it was a great drive and visit. We skipped the Swedish Crown, but chose to walk south to the small and cozy place called the White Peacock. From Lynchburg we drove Route 4 back, but now with the sunlight behind us and massive cloud formations in front of us, slowly moving east. We drove to Council Grove and sat down at the trail house. I tasted buffalo. While the sun was slowly coming down, we drove back home. I pulled across 177 at the lookout, and we watched the sun slip behind a low-hanging cloud. Then come out again, and once more the clouds turned violet, pink, and orange. It was a great end to a day of sharing Kansas, our state.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. With that, our time's away for today. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. Over this, the K-State Radio Network.